Hello. Hello, I'm
Hi,
Karen. Hi, Ida. Hi.
hi,
I,
Karen.
hi, it's nice to have you here. I'm Karen Jenkins-Johnson, principal of Jenkins-Johnson Gallery in San Francisco and New York. Thank you for joining us. My team and I hope that you're healthy, safe, and well during these very challenging times. We welcome you to our 15th Conversation on Culture, a weekly discussion with artists, collectors, and curators on current art world topics. Today, I'm in conversation with gallery artist Aïda Muluneh, one of Africa's leading photojournalists and visual activists. She is joining us from Abidjan, Ivory Coast. In my opinion, Aïda is one of the most focused and dedicated artists working today. Aïda was born in Addis Ababa in 1974. She left Ethiopia at a young age. She spent a nomadic childhood between Yemen and England. Her family settled in Canada in 1985. In 2000, Aïda received a BA in communications with an emphasis in film from Howard University. After graduating, she worked as a photojournalist at the Washington Post. She returned to her homeland in Ethiopia in 2007. Aïda lives and works between Addis Ababa and Abidjan. Aïda's work express what it is to be an African woman, to encapsulate gender and identity, and to situate it within the colonial experience. Her work is socially engaged, looking at everyday experiences of Africans, especially East African women. Aïda's work is a visual diary of her history and the history and current issues of her country. Aïda Muluneh's work is in the permanent collection of museums, including the Museum of Modern Art, Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art, the Schomburg Center for Research on Black Culture, Toledo Museum of Art, and National Gallery of Victoria, Australia. She has had recent exhibitions at Somerset House, London, Aga Khan Museum in Toronto, the Degal Photo Biennial in South Korea, and Museum of Contemporary Photography, Chicago. I'm proud to announce that in 2021, Aïda will have an upcoming solo exhibition at Spelman College. Aïda is the first Black woman to co-curate the Nobel Peace Center exhibition and is a 2018 Catchlight Fellow. Aïda is also an entrepreneur. She is the founder and director of Addis Foto Fest, which she started in 2010. It is the first biannual international photography festival in East Africa. She also founded DESTA, Developing and Educating Society Through Art, for Africa Creative Consulting PLC in Addis Ababa, where she educates, curates, and develops cultural projects with local and international institutions. I'm happy to have Aïda here with me today. There will be a Q&A at the end of the conversation, so please send us any questions via the Q&A button. Also join the chat during the conversation. Thank you, Aïda, again for joining us. I've been looking forward to this conversation. It's so nice to have you. You just told us today it's a holiday in Abidjan. Even more so, thank you for giving up your holiday to communicate with us here.
No, it's my pleasure, Karen.
So before we dive into the conversation, I want to show a clip on your practice.
I do believe that the act of creativity is a spiritual provocation. Even when you look at traditional art from Africa, a lot of it is a spiritual manifestation. My creative process starts with a sketch. I'm always thinking, and I live more in my head than I do outside of my head. There's an expression that says that the sitter gives the photo, not the photographer taking the photo. So the relationship between myself and the model is quite important for me. My main focus is not the sexuality of the woman or the exotic sense of the woman, but it's really presenting the woman with a very fierce and very strong, intensity. She's like a reflection of me, is how I see it. In a way, she is the portal sort of for my visual diary and my experiences. When I'm shooting and creating this work, it's like a trance. What's important for me when we're shooting is really not only energy, but the sharing of love, because it's almost like moving with one body to make this whole thing come into reality. When we're drinking coffee together, when we're eating together. So even my son will make a contribution to that. We're functioning with a sense of purpose. And that purpose is, how do we make something magical happen?
Thank you very much. So before we leave that, I just encourage the audience to please go ahead and we will have more of that film available on our website. It's a beautiful film. Aïda's she majored in film at Howard. She's a wonderful filmmaker, and when she's at Spelman, we hope to have one of her major films on view there as well. Now let's get to it. So, Aïda.
Yes.
Who are some of the people that mentored and inspired you?
I mean, a lot of my mentors were actually African-American photographers. So photographers such as Chester Higgins and Dudley Brooks, and also the late Harley Little, who was a commercial photographer based out of DC. I've been very fortunate to have these type of mentors in my life who have really had a big influence. And obviously photographers like Gordon Parks as well, which was had a big impact seeing his work.
Now, Gordon in particular, I have one of his pieces here behind me. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on how maybe what of Gordon Parks in particular, since the audience is, I know, Aurora Gordon, how he has, what about his work has influenced you?
I mean, as you know, Gordon's work, I think in the inception, he started out in doing just basic fashion, and eventually he went into journalism. The thing that impressed me about him is that for me, he is a truly Renaissance man, because he pretty much did everything, including cinema. So he was the first Black filmmaker in Hollywood to make a film. And, there were a lot of interesting factors to him, but I always found that his work to have this intimacy that gave us a slice of the African-American life, especially at that time period, but that showed us sort of this reality with a form of dignity. And I think it's the same also for Chester Higgins' work, that, it's presenting our own people through a lens that shows that we are just like everybody else, living our lives and dealing with the struggles. So I met Gordon Parks once because there was an award at Howard University that was dedicated to him. And that was, it was a while ago. This is before he passed away. And I actually went to the funeral as well. But I think for a lot of African-American photographers, Gordon Parks plays a role in being almost in a sense, like the Malik Sidi Bey for those of us that are in Africa. So in that sense, I can talk for a long time about his work, and I wish I played music, I would try to complete my Renaissance women movement. But
Well, bringing that in, let's talk about, Gordon had several challenges, and most of the other photojournalists as well. So what do you think some of the challenges we face in trying to promote the visual language of Black people?
I mean, the ironic thing for me when I was in the States is that I remember there were editors that used to tell me that I had too many Black people in my portfolio. And what was surprising was that I think if a white photographer came, they would not say there's too many white people in the portfolio. So the first thing is just opportunity. You know, opportunity is quite limited, and it's quite challenging, not just to enter the industry, but to stay inside the industry. So that challenge, I don't think went away. I mean, you know, it's just, I think now we're all curious to see how the system is going to change. And it's not just something that's superficial, you know, when we speak about Black Lives Matter, but the same challenges that I face, I think Gordon Parks faced. So this is just to give you an idea that I know when I was in the States, the only publications you can really ever get work for was, you know, maybe like Black Enterprise or Ebony or any of these other places. And that's why when I started at the Washington Post, it was actually Dudley Brooks that brought me in. And I don't think I would have ever even entered that system to even learn from that experience. But this is, you know, the unfortunate thing. You know, there's a lot of amazing photographers everywhere, especially, you know, when you talk about Africa and the diaspora. But it always comes back to the opportunities and the doors being there for us to open.
And so your mentor opened the door for you, but you were, of course, knocking, and you had. So how would you advise those photographers listening now and young artists listening now with today? How would you advise that they move forward in trying to enter as a photography, especially in photojournalism?
Yeah. I mean, I've said it many times in several interviews and also to my students. I always say, you know, if you want to be rich and famous, don't try to be a photographer because it's a very difficult field to stay in. And the intent is always the key thing. So your intention of why you want to be a photographer has to be quite solid because you have to endure a lot of things. You have to have the discipline. You have to be able to stick with it. And it's not an easy field. So in that sense, what I try to encourage young people is, you know, to understand also what the market looks like. It's not just, you know, shooting whatever, but to fully understand what does the industry look like fully. And I think for those that are in the US, there's more opportunities because there's more diversification within photography. So for example, if you wanted to focus only on product photography or architecture or what have you, there's that opportunity. But everything takes time. And it requires being diligent in the sense of really working at it. So it's not just shooting when there's something to do, but you know, I remember, I mean, for me, early on, I was shooting almost every day, and you have to practice continuously to hone your craft, but also to be curious and to do research and to see what else is out there, not just in the American market or the European, but to see what's going on also in Africa, Middle East, and Asia. So that's sort of the advice that I have for young and emerging photographers in that sense.
So in trying to restructure our industry, the challenges that we're facing, would you say that going to entering the, because you're, I mean, let me tell you, you're all over the world. I mean, literally, sometimes when I text you or email, I don't know where you are. You are making inroads everywhere. A lot of people can't do that, and they don't have the wherewithal to do that. So you are, in essence, restructuring in a trailblazer. What about the gallery arena in you know, helping to promote the visual language within the galleries and the museums? The challenges that we're facing there.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about for artists entering the gallery system, or are you talking about the galleries entering to other platforms?
The artists, yeah. And
I mean, what it always comes back to is you know, education, and I cannot emphasize this anymore. Education is such a key component, and a lot of, I think, young photographers want to enter the galleries, or they want to enter into the festivals, or, you know, do all these things. And I mean, I can say it for photographers in Africa because we have very limited schools. A lot of photographers are self-taught, and there's always this emphasis of trying to find a gallery in Europe or in the West. But I think the first thing is that for young photographers, that you have to develop your visual language, meaning that you have to master your craft first and foremost, which means, so for example, for myself, you know, I've shot weddings, I've done different events, you know, I've done all the types of photography you can imagine. And it took me a while to come into this form that you see. And this is sort of something that I realized, you know, style is probably the most difficult thing to develop, you know, and once you find your style, then you can start having traction. But to enter into sort of the arena of showing your work and entering into these galleries, there has to be, I think, some truth to the artist, meaning that, again, it goes back to what type of work you're creating, because I think people see in that, you know, if you're trying to mimic or be something else that you're not, that also shows in the work. So often I know that for a lot of the young artists, you know, they say, well, you know, my work, I can't get into this gallery and that. And I said to them, look, this is the same challenge for everybody. This is why I say it's not an easy road. You know, you have to stick with it, and you have to always be curious. You have to continuously grow, meaning that you, each year you should be getting closer to the goal that you have set out for yourself. But at the same time, it also means that don't be discouraged if that door is closed, because the ironic thing for me is that all the doors that were closed for me, now all of a sudden they're wide open, you know, but I'm still the same person, you know
Right.
what I'm saying? Even the institutions that saw, you know, my current style, who didn't give me any sort of recognition, or, you know, they weren't interested. Now all of a sudden they're coming back with interest. So it's a matter of sticking to it at the end of the day, but growing through that, not doing the same thing, but continuously growing and developing your work.
So let's discuss education, especially the importance of it in Ethiopia, and that is really the focus of your work, or in Ethiopian women, and how is a lack of education impacting women, especially in East Africa?
When you say as far as women in general, you're talking about within the creative sector, or?
Within the creative sector, and also just, I mean, you just completed the water aid project to
Okay.
help women in East Africa.
Yeah, so I mean, the advocacy work that I do is really tied into utilizing art as a form of not just self-expression, but to really promote specific causes that I'm interested in. And when you talk about education, I don't think most people imagine that having access to water actually has an impact on the women's education. So if a woman is spending 3 hours, you know, one way to bring water, there's really not that much time to do much else, because you still have house chores and so forth. So in that regard, the Water Aid Project was really to shed light on how, you know, how water has an impact not only on the upward mobility of our women, but also on education, on health, you know, all these other factors. So in that sense, in that project, that's what my goal is. As it relates to, if you're asking about the general overview about education in Ethiopia, I mean, I think that overall, again, I can only speak for Ethiopia, but there's more schools now than we've ever had. We have more graduates now than we've ever had in the past. So now the question is, you know, the quality of the education. The question is also the accessibility. And then when we talk about the creative sector, we have one of the oldest art schools in that region. But again, it's a matter of the art school also supporting the artists to go global. And I think right now where we are in this globalization, what it comes down to is that we have to be thinking not only within our cities or our countries, but we have to connect continentally, we have to connect globally as well. So this is the missing link that I find with a lot of the different schools that exist across Africa that are teaching art, is that there has not been, I think there needs to be more support in order to get our artists even further, because most of the artists that you see are really pushing themselves, or some might even be self-taught in that sense.
Well, that leads me to what you're doing as an entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur, with your Addis Photo Fest. And you know, you started that in 2010. What are you doing within your country to build the structure of also bringing in art and culture and letting them know how the importance of that, and in helping to develop photographers within your country and the financial ramifications of that to people in Ethiopia and also to the country as a whole.
Right. I mean, for me, I've sat on several panels, for example, with the Africa Union. Even I presented in Parliament in 2011 to the Ethiopian government in regards to our sector and what we need support on. Most people don't know that, you know, my main agenda is to change policies as it relates to photographers in my own country. This was really the big thing before Dr. Abiy came in. But having an event like the Addis Photo Fest, I really believe and still believe that culture is an integral component to development. So I know that within the developmental goals that we have set, we're not taking into consideration culture, but actually when you look at Africa, we're very rich in culture. And I don't mean like, you know, the ethnic wear or the food. I'm talking about contemporary culture even in itself. So right now, as Africans, we are the ones as artists promoting our countries. And by doing that, you know, what I try to emphasize is that it needs the support of government. So having the Addis Photo Fest, which I started in 2010, the key focus for me was that, you know, I started out by teaching photographers, and I realized it wasn't just about teaching photographers. I have to also teach the community. I have to teach all the stakeholders. And I wasn't necessarily interested in only doing an African festival. I wanted to do an international festival because as we move into this world, you know, we have to create these bridges globally. I mean, you know, this is a huge industry, the photo industry, but what percent does Africa really have a share in that? So the way that I'm looking at it is that it's really about developing capacity. So for example, we do workshops, we do portfolio review, we have international partners. But the key thing is also bringing together photographers from different parts of Africa and different parts of the world, because often there isn't conversations happening with photographers from around the world. And as you know, Karen, most of the international festivals that we see embedded, you know, in Europe or in America, there rarely is a fully diverse event. You know, there might be like that one Black person in there or that one, I don't know, Asian or what have you. But this is my main goal, is I want to continue developing the festival into something that, you know, is fully diverse, but also having the global conversation in Addis Ababa when we're talking about the industry and how the industry is moving forward as well.
And so you've had how many? 4 now? You've had?
No, we've had 5. This was actually our 6th that we were working on. Yeah.
Okay. And your next one is when?
Our next one was supposed to be this December, but obviously it's been postponed. So we're shifting it to 2021 December, and next edition, actually, we're going to start going yearly as opposed to every 2 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. It's not easy. Don't congratulate me.
I know you're working all the time. One of the things too, you know, let's talk about the money end of this, because let's talk about, you sometimes quote this Ernst and Young, and I don't know if they're called Ernst and Young anymore. Can you tell us about that? Because I think that gives people a scope of what you're trying to do in Ethiopia.
No, I mean, the frustrating part in Africa is that whenever you say an artist, I think business people and politicians think we're just like these hippies who are, you know, just fantasizing about the art world, but it's not that. I mean, art is a viable industry, and there's actually a paper, anybody can look it up, just Google, you know, Ernst & Young Creative Sector Africa, and it will show you that it's really an industry that there's income, there's a lot of sort of positive factors to it, but there's no really solid investment. And even that study was done in collaboration with the musician Angelique Kidjo, who was part of that study, and to show that when we talk about the creative sector, it's not just photography, you know, we're talking about music, dance, cinema, you know, both the visual and performing arts. So for that, it is something that I think not only in Africa, but I think globally, that people need to understand that it is something that creates jobs, also shifts perceptions, and at the same time as well, it's an important factor. You know, culture is an important factor, creativity is an important factor. Even if you look at education, having an art class in grade school has such a big impact on kids, you know? So that's what I'm interested in, but mostly I'm interested in how do we create a self-sustainable format when we talk about the creative industry, and how do we find the right type of investment, not just a small donation here and there, but this is an industry that I think the potential is quite large if the right investment is made into it.
And your country now is making that investment, so much so to the point that you're able to do your photo fest every year. Is that
No,
right?
we're
No?
not there yet. No, we're we're not there yet. No, I mean, it's the festival runs really through the support of international organizations, and I think this is the reality for most of us in the cultural sector in Africa, is there is money in Africa, but convincing our own government and convincing our own business people to invest in these creative sector, that's still the biggest challenge.
And just let's just set this aside for a moment, because this is something that I think we could talk further on. I know that the audience here has seen your work in Johannesburg. They've seen it here in different art fairs. They've seen it in my gallery. They've seen it at museums. Let's just dive a little bit into your practice and what it is you are doing with your bodies of work. I mean, you've started out with earlier on with black and white, and then moved into color, and then some of the series that we have are Memory of Hope, the Water Life series, and all that. So can you just to satisfy the desire to hear from the audience to know a little bit about your practice and how you decide to focus on certain areas, because it's quite diverse, and within each series it's quite in depth.
Right. No, a lot of my inspiration actually comes from my photojournalistic work. I'm still a photojournalist. I still enjoy doing photojournalism. And I think a lot of times people ask me, where do I get the inspiration? And the inspiration is just from my daily life. You know, every frame that you see is an experience that I've encountered or a thought that I wanted to explore. And within that process, what I'm looking at is really, you know, in the early stages, and as you saw in the video, everything starts with a piece of paper. So I sketch out my ideas. And then from that sketch, that's when we start doing, you know, the location, the clothing, the hair, you know, all these components come into play. And the sketch for me is just sort of like a foundation, sort of almost like a template. But the magic that I speak about is that once we have everything set up, you know, sometimes I'll make this great effort of painting the backdrops and setting this up and that up, and then I'll realize the shot doesn't work, and then we have to reshift. But that's the beauty of it, is being able to create something that's planned out and organized, but looking for that sort of moment where the unexpected moment of getting, you know, something magical. And this has happened on and on. And sometimes, you know, for example, this for both sides, you know, it was very straight. I had it in my mind. This was really right after, you know, what Trump had commented on in regards to Charlottesville. And then from that, I don't know, it just came to my mind, and I sketched it, and I think we produced it like within a month. So, so in that way, it's a full process. And I think the way that I approach my work is almost like a filmmaker, because I'm, in a sense, storyboarding, and I'm, you know, I have my crew to make that one vision come into life. So none of what I'm doing would not be possible without my team. But it requires to be highly organized as well.
So that brings into collaboration. Do you collaborate with other artists, with the design of the sets? How does collaboration come into your body of work?
I mean, the way that I was an athlete before I got into photography, so I'm all about teamwork. But for example, my backgrounds are painted by an artist named Tedros Bakala, who is an amazing artist. And, you know, I basically discussed with him, this is what I would like to have done. and he does that. But the way that the team works in the collaboration in that sense is that everybody has their hands in it. And I know sometimes the ideas that I have might be a little bit crazy, but everyone is always curious. And I will even, you know, ask them, what do you guys think? You know, what does this say or mean to you? And it's always fascinating to hear that back. So in regards to my team, that's how I work. In regards to collaboration with people within my field, I'm always, you know, this is something that I'm very much interested in. So even, for example, currently we have a large installation of my work in Sharjah at the Sharjah Museum through the Africa Institute. And as you know, Karen, it's not just presenting my work, but I felt, okay, we have this amazing museum. They have agreed to let me include other work. So what we decided is we took archives, you know, photographers from all the editions of the Addis Photo Fest, and we presented it alongside with my work, you know. So this is how, from my end, this is how I see it, you know, when you talk about collaboration, is that from, to me, I've reached these points that, you know, these markers that I'm looking for. But now the next step is, how do I bring on other photographers with me, and how do I introduce new photographers into the pipeline? So these are the things that I'm always processing.
Well, I think that that also helps differentiate you from other artists. And I know that in working with Spellman, we are also trying to work with you, bringing along artists, younger artists that you feel will help benefit from what you are doing, and for others to see, especially in the audience of a large audience such as Spellman has.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the role of advocacy also within some of these bodies of work that we've been showing here. History as well, coming forward with contemporary issues that you have facing in
Right.
Africa in particular.
Right. No, I mean, to me, it's as I mentioned, everything that I am interested in is just things that I have experienced, you know, as a Black woman, as an African woman, as an Ethiopian, as a mother, you know, as a daughter, all these things. So what the audience experiences is really just almost like my own visual diary of all these experiences that I have gone through. But at the same time, you know, there are things that I'm curious about, and that's why, like, you know, most people see like the color and they think that it's just about the color, or they think it's just about the face painting. It's not about that. Anybody can paint a face, you know, anybody can put on a colorful robe, but there is codings and markers in each frame, even for Ethiopians. So for example, if an Ethiopian audience member comes and looks at the work, they'll recognize specific things that I put in there for Ethiopians.
Yes.
Whereas a foreigner might look at it as something very graphical. So in that sense, my visual language is very precise, in the sense that, you know, the technical aspect of it, of how I shoot. And, you know, if you look at a majority of my work, there's no shadow, because it's sort of an intentional approach for me. And also my philosophy is that I don't think art should be for the elite, you know. Art should be something that transcends borders, culture, religion, whatever you call it. So, you know, when my cousins who, you know, are not, you know, they're from the village, when they look at my work, I know they remember it, you know, it's something sticks in their mind. And this is what I'm really, I'm really pushing towards. So even, for example, this work, this is something that I did for Lumiere d'Afrique, which was sort of a collection of work featuring one artist from all the countries in Africa, and in discussion on the importance of electricity, on powering Africa, why we need electricity in Africa. And my whole thing was that without electricity, you know, education falters, or there is no education almost, you know.
Could you tell us what this says in Amharic?
Yeah, so it's basically it's saying, it's the statement, it says it's darkness giving way to light. So it's it actually came from a textbook that it's a kid's textbook, and I just reversed the wording because what the wording, I think, in Amharic was basically saying that it was, you know, darkness, sort of light giving way to darkness, and for me it was basically darkness giving way to light. And as you know, in everything, you need to have darkness and light because that's how life is as well.
So that, you know, getting this out and educating people as to what's actually happening within East Africa, because we see a lot of West African art. What do you say? This Thomas Mellon is asking a question saying, in Africa, the big part of society is informal. Normally 60% of the urban population is informal. Working behind or beside the official society, how can photography contribute to the informal Africa?
What does it mean when you say informal Africa? Like within the rural regions? I don't understand that.
I don't know.
Hold on. Urban. Okay, so for example, in Ethiopia, about 70%, you know, we're almost like 120 million people, 70% are still farmers. So most of our society is in the rural regions. If I understand this question correctly, I mean, to me, when you look at rural regions, when you look at the tradition, the culture, the politics, the economics, photography has a very integral relationship or an important role in that. So, you know, to me, to engage with Water Aid, to do this water project, it wasn't just about the artistic work. The next phase of this project for me is to actually do campaigns relating to, you know, having social behavior impacts, if you understand. So that means that you're not just doing advocacy within the art part, but you're also doing something that gives information. And what I've seen within the rural regions is that information is one of the biggest issues. So for example, basic information that we know when it relates to health or, you know, just, you know, money management or what have you, this information is not there. And this is where I think the role of photography can play, because right now, as we all know, you know, everybody has these phones, even in the farmers have it. So what our focus needs to be is how do we engage the rural regions through the technology that we have access to, but at the same time, how do we use photography as a form of communicating something very specific, whether it's to educate, whether it's for creativity, whether it's to preserve history, because sometimes we often forget that, you know, the history of Africa has not been documented by Africans. It's been, a majority has been by foreign photographers, that we have to, I guess, engage more of our young photographers to document these moments. And in the case of Ethiopia, you know, for example, when I arrived in Ethiopia in 2007, what Addis Ababa looked like in 2007 and what it looks like today, completely different. I can't even remember what Addis Ababa looked like in 2007, but we systematically documented the whole city so that we do have that archive now. And the same thing goes for all these fading traditions also in the rural regions that are fading out, that no one is documenting. So there's a lot to say. There's a lot to say about the role of photography.
And also, Aïda, you're played a big part of that, because one of the things that you would tell me is that you would go to these conferences around the world, and you would be a Black photographer, especially East Africa, and they would have these white photographers going in and trying to tell you, in essence, about your own country, and putting Africa through their lens and not through yours. And you would often express your frustration with this. And I believe your Addis Photo Fest is developing photographers and is developing people that will have the skill sets to go out and thereby truly communicate the philosophy and perspective and viewpoint of an East African, instead of it being interpreted through a white person who is really, quite candidly, outside looking in, and putting their own narrative on what's actually happening in your country.
Right. I mean, this is why I started teaching before I started the festival when I first arrived in Addis Ababa, because that's what I saw, is that there wasn't enough of an infrastructure for photographers So education, this is where it plays its part. And right now, I know that, the number of photographers that we've developed through DFA is, it's quite significant. And even the most recent prize winner for the World Press Award, who was nominated for 3 categories, and I think he's probably the first African or a Black person to be nominated for 3 categories, was Muluneh. He won the Spot News category. And this is a photographer that, I've known for quite some time, and I've seen him develop throughout the years. And this is the whole thing, is that the only way that we can combat these perspectives that still go out into the international media is by developing our own talent and getting our own images out there. And you have to remember, when I started and where we are now we have all the social media platforms, we have all this access to technology that helps us to penetrate, So for example, to me, our primary goal should always be is that, if somebody just Googles Ethiopia and Google image and see what shows up, that's the page that we need to change, So, so in that sense, it's really, there's really always that cliche that I get very frustrated about, because you can't possibly come to Ethiopia for a week and tell me about my country,
Exactly.
It doesn't work like that. You know what I mean? But, and even yesterday, in my conversation with Finbar O'Reilly, one of the things that we were discussing is there's a lot of photographers that come to Ethiopia, but they rarely make connections with photographers that are actually on the ground. And this is the whole thing of creating bridges, is what I'm talking about. That there's a lot to learn from us as well. It's not just waiting for photographers from outside to come and teach us either,
Well, and this is why I find it, when I go on the road with your work, of that we're having discussions about different symbolism and the face painting, the colors, the symbolism within your work. It is informing and also challenging and making people think about their perspective on things in the world. Could you just talk a little bit about this Departures cover that you have here, and some of the symbolism and some of the why her face is blue? Why do you use white? Why do you use red? Some of these questions are coming through in the Q&As.
Right. No, I mean, when I initially started painting the faces in Ethiopia, in the southern region, in the Omo Valley, there is traditional face painting that they do dots all around. And I had initially started this face painting when I was at Howard, actually, for the we have our annual homecoming fashion show, and they had asked for us to propose the lead image for the fashion show. And because I am an African in a historically Black college, there was always that sort of never fitting in, but kind of fitting in sort of situation. So I decided, okay, I want to present Africa in a way to show that I am African as well. And that was really the inception. And I did it for the fashion show in order to create this work. And I guess it was just too weird for them and never got selected. But a few years later, it became part of the permanent collection of the Smithsonian. So it's kind of crazy, So that was the first time I started painting faces. At that time, I painted fully Black, and then I did the white dots and then the veil. So if you go to the National Museum of African Art, you'll see the work there. And then I left that, and it was really Simone Jami who, when we did the 99 series, we knew about that project at least 5 years, I think it was. And so the final year, he was like, okay, you need to produce something. And Simone only knows me through my black and white photography. So I said, yeah, I wonder if I should go back to face painting. And I wasn't sure about it. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna paint faces. But it was honestly the exploration of traditional African culture. This is what fascinated me, because I've always felt that the traditional cultures were like, and I've said this many times, I always find traditional cultures to be highly sophisticated, even though in the West or whatever they want to say it's primitive. No, it's not primitive. It's very sophisticated language and that exists. So, the body decoration, our use of color, all these components. So to me, it was basically pulling from the traditional culture, bringing it into the contemporary, and having this very futuristic conversation within that. So when I paint a face white or half blue or what have you, it's just based on the mood that I'm feeling within that. But when you look at the neck and the dots, this is, the neck is very Ethiopian. These are traditional tattoos that we have in the northern region. So I've put several of these elements, and through all of that also, for the audience, is that if you just search Picasso Africa, Picasso took so much from the continent, and he was greatly inspired by Africa. And it's not because it was primitive, it's because it was highly sophisticated art, in my opinion. So for that, when it comes to how I'm structuring the pieces and what I choose to do as far as the clothing or the colors, all of this is just me systemizing a very specific sort of voice that I want to put out there. I hope I've answered the question. I feel like I ran off in a tangent.
No, I think that's great. Could you, you know what, I was so touched when we started working together. You put together this series, Memory of Hope, for my gallery to present to the world. And the series is American based, but at the same time bringing in the, I would say, East African culture in as well. And this particular piece, Seed of the Soul, has a lot of symbolism within that. And it's really layered. And if you could just talk about this for just a quick minute, I would appreciate that. And then there's a question here that I'd like to bring to your attention regarding collaboration again.
Okay. So if you remember the painting by, what's his name? Norman Rockwell?
Yes.
Of Ruby Bridges. When she was going to school, the first being integrated into an all-white school. So he did this really amazing painting where, she was with, I guess, the, what do you call them? I guess the security or anyways, she was with the police, that were escorting her. And in the back wall, he painted in the National Guard, exactly. So in the back wall, you can see that he had painted, like someone had thrown tomatoes at her, that there was like the word nigger like written in the back, there was all these things. And to me, there's always this fascination, like in the US, that, we're in 2020 and, we're still talking about race, which is, a bit out there in a lot of ways, but this is something that has to continue on. But what I wanted to express was when you look at what happened, especially to the Muslim community after September 11th, it's almost like it shifted from race to religion, and that shift was what sort of provoked this work, in my opinion, because I was thinking, and I've done a lot of work around, especially Islam in Ethiopia, but what I was really thinking was for women, Muslim women living and working in the US, what they have to endure for something that's based on their faith. And this is sort of a complete violation of the, the so-called constitution. This was what provoked me to make this piece. And if you look at the clothing, it's just an Arabic word that says salam, which in my language also means like greetings, or it also means peace. And she's holding this flower. And for me, it always comes back to like these perceptions that are formed, especially in the US, based on media and images that go out of how society perceives, how sort of the media machine is sort of perpetuating very specific things that at the end you realize people have no clue of what they're hating at the end of the day.
Yes. And what I like about this piece, and this is you, Aïda, too. You say your work often reflects you. You see this woman, her gaze is very strong and very confident, looking back to the viewer saying, yeah, I've got my hijab on, and what about it? Peace to you,
right.
And here is my symbols to help ward off your evil spirit.
Right. That's going really deep into it, but okay.
Well, in essence, I mean, I've had people stand in front of this photograph and want to know what some of the symbolism was.
Right.
And remembering this time this is 2017. In 2017, this country, the United States, was seeing things they never thought they would see before. And like you
Right.
said, it's race and not only race, but religion. And people being not allowed into this country based upon their religion is the
Right.
same thing going back to Ruby going in to integrate the schools.
Exactly.
It's crazy, it's mind-boggling, and we were going backwards, not
Yeah.
forwards.
Yeah.
And people that weren't ever discriminated against previously are finding themselves being discriminated against.
That's my point right there, you know.
COVID-19, Asians are finding themselves
Yeah.
being discriminated against, like they are Chinese, like they've
Right.
never been discriminated against before. So it's sad to see, and the conversations I've had with people in front of your work, especially both sides. If Alex, could you bring that up, please? Both sides, when this was happening, this is really a layered piece. And Harriet, hi Harriet. Harriet's here. She acquired one of your pieces at APAD, this piece at APAD. She loves it. She always talks about it. She's asking, you know, about bananas, because this has a universal message, regardless of Charlottesville, right?
Right.
Forget about, this is a photograph that decades in the future will still have the same meaning if you place it in other countries, forgetting about the history of who's in the White House and their behavior.
Exactly.
This will still stand. If you could just tell us a little bit, because Harriet's asking about what the bananas mean.
So the bananas came about when I did the collection, The Wolf You Feed. And if any of the audience watches football, or, you know, what Americans call soccer, Danny Alves, who's a black player, was getting into the stadium and somebody threw a banana at him. And the video is online. You can find it. Just put Danny Alves banana. So somebody threw a banana at him. And in Europe, for a lot of the black players, the biggest challenge is, imagine you're trying to go do your job and you got, you know, a stadium full of people chanting like very racist things and throwing bananas at you. And so what he did is he picked it up and he ate it. And I thought, wow, this is such a fascinating way of how he processed such an ugly thing. Imagine, like, it's like you're going to your office job and somebody throwing a banana at you, and, you know, it's like insane. So the banana became sort of the recurring symbol that you see showing up in my work. And anytime that you see banana, it's really having this conversation about race. And what I found fascinating about especially racism in America is that it's almost like all these symbols have been formed to perpetuate racism, which is a bit crazy, which has gone to food, you know? So for example, when you see the American dream with the watermelon, it's just, you know, there's all these factors that come in. And I was like, it's kind of crazy that, you know, you're using food as a symbol to oppress people. That's like, you got too much time on your hand for all of this, you know? So for me, when a lot of people look at the American dream, they, like in this image, you can't see it, but if you actually zoom in and you look at the watermelon, on the far right-hand corner, there's actually a fly on there. So most people think it's just a seed, but it's an actual fly. And what I was trying to say is that in our culture, we have this thing where, you know, when somebody eats something really juicy, or, you know, you eat something like a great meal, you know, it makes you hungry to, when you see somebody else eating it, makes you hungry to eat that. But if a fly lands on it, I mean, nobody, you know, your appetite would be ruined. So that was the irony for me, is that here's this American dream, you know, we all fantasize about the American dream, but it's tainted now, that it's kind of like, I don't know, I feel like it's gone backwards. So there's all these symbols that I incorporate in there. And even the shadow, for example, in this work, again, this is why I say that everything happens in layers. The shadow was not planned, but when I was shooting it, I saw the shadow when we're editing, and I said, this is really fascinating. So we went back and then we shot the, what do you call it? I mean, we installed the noose on there. And this was just the symbolism for me, is that as Black people, you know, when you are in the States, there's always this lingering shadow of realizing, you know, you're not quite you don't quite belong, you know. And remember, I have traveled across the states, and you know, I've driven through the South, which is pretty scary. But anyway, so these are sort of the symbols that I've incorporated within the work.
Well, this is also representing police brutality.
Exactly. And this is before, you know, all the hype. And this is why I'm trying to be very clear. And this is the whole thing, the challenge of being in America, I think, as a Black person, and then being an African. And I was telling you this yesterday, we have a lot of similarities, but there is no bridge between Africa and the diaspora. Like, there isn't a full bridge to have, you know, a real discussion, because even if you're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, that starts in Africa first and foremost. You know, the foundation of all these issues come within the continent.
Well, I've had several collectors feel uneasy when standing in front of American Dream. I have had spouses, one spouse want to acquire the piece, but the other spouse saying, no, we can't possibly have that in our home. It's like, why not, honey? Why not? Yeah. Why can't you have that discussion in your home?
Because you're not ready for that conversation. That's basically what that means. Because there's no violence in it if you really look at it. You know, there's a subtlety. But this is the whole thing with my work, and sorry to interrupt you, is that the color makes you comfortable, but inside there's also discomfort, you know, and that's how I see it. That, and what I was saying earlier, you know, you cannot appreciate light until you see the darkness as well. So, but people have to be ready for it. You know, this is not, I'm not creating a work of vanity. This is not an exercise of vanity. It's really, you know, my thoughts and what I'm interested in, not necessarily even what an audience is interested in, but yeah.
This is why I call you a visual activist. You are challenging people to really look inward and look and see what are these symbols. You're opening the door for these dialogues that I think we need to have, and the history of symbols, the history of watermelon. When my children were little kids, my husband did not want me buying anything with their clothing that has a watermelon on it. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, why not? What's wrong with it? He goes, my kid's not going to wear that. And I stopped. I didn't buy any. I bought one for my son, and I stopped doing that. And we should not allow people to tell us what we can and can't do because they put labels on things. And you know, some people don't even know what watermelon means to Blacks, and there's a derogatory element of it. And so your work brings in these discussions. So I think you're educating as well. These are discussions that I have with people in front of your work, and sometimes I can tell that they're cringing a little bit, but when they come into my space, this is my opportunity and they enter into a dialogue about the piece, I'm not going to sidestep it. And I encourage the audience to have those quiet conversations with people when you're able to, because that is how we affect change. That is what artists are about. They are about our time, bringing into question what is happening during our time, and let's push the boundaries. Let's push those boundaries without having the conversations. We're not going to affect change. And people are going to remain ignorant, ignorant. And we can't have that. So Aïda, you just got me going.
Yeah, no, I see. I thought you were going to start preaching, but continue.
So anyway, so thank you for these thought-provoking images, and also there's a question in here. Let me go to the Q&A because we're running close to time here. Okay. One of the persons here, Marcus Paul.
Hi, my friend Marcus.
Hi, Aïda. It's really insightful to find out how you approach your work. You mentioned that there are not a lot of photography schools in Africa. Is it a long-term goal to create a school or some sort of platform that can help photographers and artists further develop their skills?
Yes, of course. That is, it's not just a long-term, it's also a short-term goal. So I've been teaching for a while now in different parts of Africa, so it's definitively something that I'm trying to work towards. But I'm doing 20 other things. But so, for example, if you look at South Africa, I think South Africa has one of the best schools. It's called Market Photo Workshop, which is quite a very intensive program, and has been producing some of the top photographers coming out of South Africa. But we need more of these institutions in different points of the continent, and that is eventually my goal, is to build that.
Great. Excuse me if I mispronounce your name. Sosina Esefa. What has been most rewarding for you while mentoring and collaborating with other artists with Desta and through Addis Photo Fest?
I think the biggest reward is, normally what we do with the Addis Photo Fest is we develop talent and then we exhibit it inside the Addis Photo Fest. And I think the greatest thing is when young photographers they finally get it, and then they come with amazing work. That's just the most satisfying thing. And for me, I'm not really a curator doing a festival. I'm just a lover of people's works. So it's quite exciting to see amazing work coming up, and then being able to show it and to share it. And, for example, in the last edition, 2018, we had about, I think, 35 photographers from Ethiopia that we presented. That was the largest number. In 2010, yeah. In 2010, we started, I think, with like 3 or something like that, 3 or 4.
Great
so,
growth.
Yeah, no, it's really, it has grown, and it's very encouraging from the festival and, just through the Desta activity to see more photographers on the streets taking photos, doing exhibitions in different hotels on their own, selling their prints, because, that's unheard of. It's even more difficult to sell paintings. So there's all these things, but the key thing is really to, we have this belief that, I think I've said it before, those who teach learn as well. So for me, it's been a quite rewarding experience. I think if I was still in New York, I would not be creating the work that I'm doing, and I wouldn't be doing all these things. So having these experiences has really formed my character, and also has helped me learn a lot, through these photographers as well.
There's Anonymous says, what are Aïda's thoughts on the growing recognition of Afrobeats and projects like Beyonce's Black is King that seek to establish a dialogue with and build a bridge to African culture?
Well, I see why this person is anonymous, but I mean, I think it's great that, certain components of Africa is going into the sort of commercial market. But my main comment is really, it's not about sourcing from us. Like, if you really want to understand what is Africa, come to Africa, help us. It's not just because it's a fad or you saw something that, that you're just going to put it into your realm and so forth. So that kind of collaboration, I mean, it's great on one hand, but I think in the continent, because we live and breathe all this stuff that might be new and hip for the West, what we're looking for is opportunities. That's what it comes down to. So for someone like Beyonce, invest in the fashion industry in Africa, because that's, especially in West Africa, that's a big thing. Here in Abidjan, there's so many amazing fashion designers that are doing amazing work, which were also featured in the in her video. But my whole thing is I look at infrastructure and system, because, and that's the thing, like for Africa, everything is coming up. I do believe, when they say Africa is the future, it is the future. But what we're looking for is long-term engagement, not like a fad of something that just is going to be forgotten about next year.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. Beyonce was just on the news with her fashion. But anyway, let's continue on. There's a few questions here that's bouncing around. I'm sorry I can't create a common thread, but do you collaborate with historians or digital humanities scholars in terms of preserving the fading cultures? I'm wondering if added collaboration with various scholars could provide the bridge for preserving the context and memories of the photographs you capture.
Well, I minored in history, so I'm a big nerd when it comes to history and preservation. I've worked, yes, with in Ethiopia. I worked with several scholars from the Addis Ababa University. As I mentioned earlier, I worked on a project on these architectural sites, these ancient Islamic architectural sites in Ethiopia. But yeah, I've done a lot of that work, and often even with water aid, my main goal was, to have that conversation and to work with the experts when it comes to, having an impact when we talk about social behavioral changes. So working collaboratively with those kind of sort of higher education, it's something that I'm always looking for and very much interested in.
Another question is Helena. Hi, Helena. I love that this work feels like a painting, although it's a photograph. Can you speak to how your work is genre bending? Also, would you ever consider making this into a film since you have a film background? I'm not quite sure which photograph she was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Sometimes, in exhibitions, people think it's a painting. I think that's a big compliment, But when I started photography in high school, I actually started in drawing and painting, and then we discovered the darkroom, and I was like, who wants to spend all that time painting, when I can just take a photo and print it up myself. But a lot of the times, I often get that comment as it relates to, is it a photo or what exactly it is. So in that sense, hold on one second. What was the last comment that she had asked? She had asked if it was.
It actually disappeared. The question disappeared. Sorry.
No, I think you went into answered, I think.
Did it? Is that what happened? I don't.
Yeah, sorry. Can you speak on how your work is genre bending? Yeah, I don't consider it to be like really genre bending. It's still a woman. I'm telling a woman's story. But I don't want, as the video had stated earlier, the emphasis is not on the, it's more on the strength and the eyes and the resilience of a woman. This is what I'm looking at. And in regards to moving into film, yes, of course, that is my ultimate goal. I don't think I'm going to be doing this work forever, but my ultimate goal is to go into cinema. But the first step is what we're working on actually currently now is to try to make video art from this work, this style of work.
I think I'd love to see that.
Oh no, it's going to be wild. You'll see.
I'm looking forward to that. As you know, hi, he has a question. Well, at Howard University, is it Haile Gerima?
Haile Gerima, yeah.
Served as my mentor. Do you pull any influence from his work in any way, shape, or form?
Well, Haile Gerima, I saw him a few summers ago, and he was highly disappointed that I wasn't in cinema. So, being his student, Haile was really like the general in the class. So, you had to be like pretty tough. But the big thing that I remember once he told me, he said that I have to find my own path. And that was very interesting because, his work, we know it quite well, but he's like, you need to find your own voice in this industry or in this creative. So when I went back and saw him a couple of years ago, and he's like, you never did anything with your degree, it's a big disappointment. And I told him, like, I'm still working. So I showed him the work, and he was really surprised. And he's like, oh, but he's like, you still need to get back to cinema. So the influence that Haile has is really, presenting the authentic voice, but at the same time as well, there are stories that we need to make, and I think for many of us who are the sort of the children of Haile, this is what we're trying to do as we continue on his path.
Thank you. So I'm going to just go real quickly here. Jeffrey Kozlov, how large is your photo festival, and how open is it to inviting Western galleries or museums or other organizations to open the door to more photographers in Africa?
Our festival is open to everybody. It's an international festival, first and foremost. So the last edition, I think we presented about 156 photographers from about 63 countries, something like that. So it's quite big. And the focus of the festival is not just fine art work or only photojournalism. It's quite it's a very diverse sort of selection and looking at different continents as well. But we're quite open. We've had, you know, we've had different galleries coming, different institutions that came to the festival to see, and also it was quite important for them to come because a lot of the selection is photographers that most people they're not in the pipeline. So that my selection has been to introduce new talent that has never been exhibited.
So this will be the last question. As a white portrait photographer that through a combination of inclination and circumstance end up taking pictures mostly of Black women, it is important for me not to carry in my picture stereotypes that are attached to Black women. How should I approach my thinking to avoid that? Thank you, and I hope to travel soon to Addis for the festival.
Okay. So the question is, he's shooting Black women and wants to...
It's important for him not to carry in his pictures stereotypes that are attached. How should I approach my thinking to avoid that?
Yeah, but you know, I've sitting on, like, let's say, like, I've been a jury for pretty much most of the major competitions globally, and you know, I still believe in the saying that, you know, a photographer doesn't take the photo, the sitter gives the photo. So that relationship is very important, because I can see in every frame who the photographer is. I don't need to physically see the photographer, but I can sense who is that photographer, the fears that they have, the inhibitions that they have, or the thought process that wasn't fully flushed out. You know, there's all these components. So for me, the key thing for this photographer is like to be honest about it and to also learn from each experience. So we cannot deny. So for example, for me, yeah, I speak English like this because I was educated in the West, but I'm still an Ethiopian, you know, I'm still an African. There's still parts of me that I can never get rid of, you know. And this is why when you look at my work, you know, there's still elements of Ethiopia in it because these are my roots and my heritage that I cannot deny. So for foreign photographers or white photographers who are documenting white women, you know, the key thing is that it always goes back to dignity and it always goes back to the intent. This is what I'm always interested in. Because sometimes there's always this cliche fantasy of shooting women naked. You know, there's always these crazy things that people have in mind. But what is the intent? What is the purpose? What are you trying to tell us? You know, what are you trying to express about yourself? You know, all of these play hand in hand.
So Aïda, thank you so much for taking time away from your national holiday to spend with this, this audience. It's been enlightening.
Thank you.
Is there anything you would like to add?
So I see that there's a photographer from Nigeria asking how to take classes. So I'm currently, we have an open call currently through Catchlight, where I'm going to do my second round of my mentorship program here in Abidjan. So this will be the West African component of the mentorship classes that I'll be hosting. And then I'll do one in East Africa as well. So if anybody's interested in West Africa, if you can bring yourself to Abidjan, then yes.
Well, you guys, today we were in the presence of greatness, and Aïda is a strong force in the art world and in the business world as well. I want to again thank you all for attending, and Aïda, it has been a pleasure, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
You take care. You be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.